Good morning. Today is the 17th of January, the year 2020, and I'm Jim Seltzer, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California. As part of the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in our country's military conflict. Today I'm here at the museum with fellow volunteers Diane Thompson, Dave Thompson, and Gary Langenbach. And today we have this honor and privilege of hearing the story of Specialist 4th Class Dick Dressler. Spec 4 Dressler, a radio relay operator with Army Artillery in South Vietnam, 1967-1968. So we're going to talk to him about a lot of other things. It's nice to have you here, Dick.
Thank you very much.
Okay. State and spell your full name.
First name, Richard, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, Allen, A-L-L-A-N, Dressler, D-R-E-S-S-L-A-R.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, October 19th, 1946.
Okay. And you've already said which town you were born in Milwaukee. And they asked me, how large is Milwaukee? Do you have any idea?
Well, I would guess Milwaukee is about around 2 million probably.
Yeah, that's
it's a good-sized city.
2 to 3 million is what I would say.
Yeah.
What did your father do?
Well, my father was a heating and air conditioning serviceman and salesman in Milwaukee for many years.
Yeah. And what was the name of your father?
Otto William Dressler.
That's a good German name. It was
a very good German name, yes.
And what was the name of your mother?
Lorraine Rose Politsky.
A good... Well, I'll ask where she was from. Where, do you know how they met?
Yes, they met when my mother was working in in the candy counter of a Woolworths store, and my dad was coming in to buy, what was it, orange slices is what he was coming to buy. And he kept coming back.
What was your mother's maiden name? Do you,
you
already said that.
Politsky, yes.
Yeah, we'll go through it again. What about your grandparents? Do you know much about your grandparents?
Not a lot. My grandfather on my dad's side was a German immigrant, and it's kind of an interesting story on how he came to the United States. He worked for a blacksmith in Germany, kind of on the German-Swiss border, and he was becoming an apprentice. And the blacksmith treated him very poorly, beat him, and he kept running away from the blacksmith and trying to find a better life. And at one point, he found out that he could get on a ship coming to the United States. And he came across the sea as, I believe, a cabin boy or something of that sort. And when he got in close to the country, he jumped ship and swam ashore. Wow. And so my father was probably an illegal immigrant at that, or my grandfather at that point. He met my grandmother in Chicago, Illinois, by placing an ad in the Chicago paper for a wife.
Yeah. I'm going to go back a little bit to get more details of it. Do you know what town he lived in Germany?
No, I don't. I have it at home, but I don't know exactly.
Do you have an idea of what time, what year he was doing this, where he came on the ship? And
no, I don't.
Probably, given your age, and probably in the 1880s or so,
I would imagine it was about that time.
But, yes. So he came across the ship and he jumped ship.
Jumped ship and swam ashore. Made his way from the East Coast to Chicago by working on farms.
Fascinating. Would you happen to know the address where you grew up in Milwaukee?
I do. 1630 North 29th Street, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And
what type of neighborhood was that like? What was the neighborhood like?
At that time, it was a great neighborhood. A lot of small homes, mainly duplexes. Germanic background for most of the people. It was kind of in the center part of the city. In the south side were more of the Polish immigrants. We were in the German immigrants, and it was a very nice neighborhood.
So your mother's maiden name sounded Polish. Was she from the Polish part of it, or
she always said it was Bohemian?
Bohemian. That's another. But that is another area. The people in that area were called Bohemians.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. It sounds better than Polish, doesn't it?
Right. I imagine it was kind of a mixture of Polish and something else.
Yeah, in that area.
Yeah.
Did you move much as a child, as a kid?
No. That was the house that I came home from the hospital when I was born, and I left it when I entered the Army in 1968, and during that time they moved. So I was there for a good 17, 18 years.
Oh.
Same neighborhood.
They waited till you left to move.
Yeah,
Did
I left and
did
when
they
I
let
came
you
back,
know?
they were gone.
How many siblings do you have?
None. I'm an only child.
Good. What did you do for recreation as a kid?
Well, we played out in the alley a lot. We played baseball. There was a school that was close. We played baseball there, a little basketball. Flew model airplanes. That was a good pastime when I was younger. And did a lot of things with my grandfather. He was the kind of fellow that he worked in a railroad yard. And when he would come home, sometimes he'd bring a radio home and he'd give it to me and say, "Here, take it apart. Don't worry about putting it back together. Just take it apart and see what makes it work."
Wow.
So he was kind of an interesting guy. He gave me a lot of opportunities to dig into things and learn.
Do you know what he did in the railroad? You said he worked for the railroads or worked in the railroad yard?
He worked in the boxcar shop, and he ran a bandsaw for 40 years for the Milwaukee Road.
Irrigation. Did you do any odd jobs when you were growing up?
Not really. I think the first job I had was about high school age when I worked for a grocery store chain, bagging groceries.
That's a
Good start.
Yep. Religious upbringing. Were you come from a religious family or?
Yeah, Lutheran family. Church was about 2 miles from the house, so we walked to church quite a bit. Went through Sunday school, catechism classes, confirmation. Really attended the same school until after, or the same church until after we were married.
Oh. Do you remember the names of the schools you went to?
I do. The grade school was 35th Street or 31st Street School in Milwaukee. The junior high school was Steuben Junior High School, another good German name. Yes. And the high school was Washington High School, all within about a 3-mile area of our home.
And how about the church that you attended?
It was the Lutheran Church of the Reformation. That's where we got married, by the way.
In the same church that you were?
Yeah.
Let's see, neighborhood movie theaters. Did you go to the movie theaters a lot? Or have a particular theater that you went to?
We did have theaters that were close. There was the Rainbow Theater. We went to see all the typical child movies and shoot 'em up cowboy movies, that type of thing. Didn't do a lot of movie attending because we didn't have a lot of money. Cash was always a problem as I was growing up, and the big thing was when my grandparents got their first color TV, and that was fun. We lived upstairs in a duplex from my grandparents, and so I was able to go down and watch their color TV instead of our plain old black and white that we had.
I hadn't talked about where you lived, but that's an interesting part of it, is that you lived in a duplex just above your grandparents.
Right, my grandparents owned the house, and we rented the upper flat, I guess it was called at that time. And there was a lot of going back and forth between my grandparents' house and the upper house, and we lived there. That's how we lived, above my grandparents until I went into service.
Did you have uncles and aunts and uncles on your father's side, or was he?
Yeah, my father's family was 9. It was 7 boys and 2 girls, and none of them lived very close. But on my mother's side, she had 1 sister, and her family and her husband lived approximately 2 houses away from us. Mm. So I had a lot. Being an only child, my interaction with other kids was mainly my cousin. We did a lot of things together and went to some of the same schools, and are still close today.
Yeah, it sounds like the typical all-American neighborhood and how they grow up.
Yeah, everybody was going back and forth between houses and playing in somebody else's yard. And
did you play sports in school?
In high school, mainly. In the earlier schools, I played volleyball and basketball and that type of thing. In high school, I played on a basketball team in high school. I was tall enough by that time, 6'4", and at that time, 6'4" was pretty superior as far as basketball playing goes. So I did a lot of that.
Good. Did you have any favorite teams that you followed?
Well, the Milwaukee Braves at that time were the big teams. Now they turned into the Milwaukee Brewers, the professional baseball team. A little later on in time, the Milwaukee Bucks, the basketball team, was a big part of Milwaukee athletics. I enjoyed both of those. Those are probably the only. Well, of course, the Green Bay Packers.
I was going to prod you on the Packers. You cannot be from Wisconsin and not be a Packers fan.
I never actually went to a Packer game. I've seen them, hundreds of them on TV since then, but I've never gone to a Packer game. We've been up to Lambeau Field in Green Bay, but that was just for the Welcome Home Vietnam celebration that was held up there.
Good. Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to get around to the Packers.
I almost forgot the Packers.
You cannot do that. Did you have any favorite players that you followed?
Well, with the Braves, Eddie Matthews and Hank Aaron were always the big players. With the Packers, Bart Starr and Ray Nitschke is always a big favorite, and with the Bucks, of course, Lou Alcindor, yeah, that became.
Yeah, I'm pulling a blank on that too. What did he change his name to?
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah.
I had to think about that one.
When you were in school, what was your favorite subject? Did you have a favorite subject?
Always the mathematics and science and drafting. It kind of set the stage for where I was going to go later in life, I think.
Okay. And let's see, that's probably not. When do you remember the first time you took a plane ride?
Yeah, it was after I got drafted. The first flight I took was from Chicago to Fort Polk, Louisiana, the reception station.
How about your first car?
My first car was a 1961 Chevrolet four-door.
Did you get that when you're after you're in the military or while you're in the military?
No, I got that when I started working. I was working for a Texaco station, and I finally had enough money where I could pay for gas and insurance, so I was able to get a car.
Okay. When was that in terms of what year was it?
After high school, so it was probably 1965.
Okay.
Before I went to service.
So 1961 was not that old.
No, it wasn't. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I got it from my father.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. High school girlfriends.
High school girlfriends was the girl that I married.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So that makes this easy. So when did you meet? How did you meet her?
We actually met in church, which is probably a good thing to say. Yeah. And we said Alpha. Well, we knew each other for Sunday school classes for many years, but didn't really care about each other at that time because we weren't really interested in boy-girl relationships, that type of thing. We sat next to each other alphabetically in confirmation class, so we got to know each other a little better. And then probably around 1962, which was around my junior year in high school, I asked her out on a date. And I guess to say the rest is history.
So just for other confirmation, how old were you for confirmation? You said you were together.
Probably 13, 14.
Okay. Yeah. So and then it was when you were a junior in high school is when you first.
That's when we first actually dated. Okay.
Yeah. Did you have favorite high school hangouts?
Yeah, Walgreens on the corner of 35th and North Avenue, and there was a.
Let's go back. Is that Walgreens is where your father and mother met? Was that you told me?
No. That was a Woolworth.
A Woolworth. I'm sorry. So yeah, I had the W right. But that's
and it was close to where we played basketball, so we would go in there on Fridays and get the all-you-can-eat fish and French fry lunch.
Explain that for people not from Wisconsin. What happens on Fridays?
We had an all-you-could-eat lunch, which was fried fish and French fries. So it was kind of a fish fry, but it was at Walgreens.
But it was a fish fry.
The basketball team would go in there and they would shudder whenever we walked in because we just kept on eating. And then there was an ice cream store that was a little further on down the block where we met for ice cream on occasion.
Yeah. When did you graduate from high school?
1964.
Okay. And what did you do after high school? Did you?
After high school, I attended the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee for about a year, a little less than a year. And during that time, I was trying to earn enough money to stay in school because my parents just didn't have the money to pay for it and for books. And so I was working one, sometimes two jobs, going to school and dating. And something had to pay the price for that, and it was going to school, so I left school. I went to work for the Harnischfeger Corporation in Milwaukee, Wisconsin as a draftsman because I had a lot of drafting background and had talent in that area. So I worked there for 6 months, and just like a lot of other people at that time, when you left school and you went out to work, the draft notice wasn't too far behind. Mm-hmm. And so I was drafted out of that job.
What does Harnischfeger do? What did they do?
Harnischfeger makes, at that time they made large construction equipment, mining equipment, walking drag lines for the coal mining industry. At this date and time, they've been bought out by Komatsu, and so they're in existence under the Komatsu name tag.
You're talking about now.
Yes.
They weren't then. They were,
no.
They've been bought by
That's
Komatsu.
within the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah. So they hired you as a draftsman out of high school, or relatively soon after high school.
Right.
With one
about
year.
6 months I lasted there until I was drafted.
Yeah. Okay. The rest of the questions: when did you join up? We know what happened. Where did you go? Okay, you were drafted. You got your draft notice.
Yes.
And what did it tell me about the draft notice? And what did it tell you to do?
Well, I wasn't surprised when I got it. It told me to report for a physical downtown Milwaukee on such and such date. I did that, and it's always kind of shocking and stunning when you go in for an Army physical if you're not used to that type of thing. And met there with a lot of other men because at that point the Vietnam War was really drawing on a lot of draftees, and chances were pretty good that when you were drafted you were going to end up in Vietnam.
Yeah. So let's make sure I've got the chronology. You graduated from high school in '64.
Yes.
Then you went to college for about a year.
About a year.
So it's '65, and then you went to work for
Harnischfeger
for 6 months. So this is about when did you get
September
drafted?
of 1966.
Okay.
28 September of '66 is when I was drafted. Okay. That was my date.
And just when the build-up was really going.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Okay, so what it was like when you told them it was like getting your physical. Then after you finish your physical, what did they tell you to do next?
They said you can go home now and expect another letter in I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and it was probably about 2 weeks. I think the need was there. So I reported back to the induction center on 26 September 1968 and was sworn into the Army of the United States.
In Milwaukee?
In Milwaukee.
Okay.
And at that point we went from there to Chicago in a bus, loaded an airplane and flew to Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Did you fly out of O'Hare? Is that where you went to O'Hare?
There's someplace in that area. I don't know.
I probably didn't know which airport it was.
Yeah, I didn't know. I was kind of astounded being on a plane for the first time. So.
Do you remember what kind of plane it was?
A four-engine propeller.
Okay, that's a 4-engine propeller plane. And you went to Fort Polk? Is that where?
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's where you took basic training?
No, that was just reception station.
Oh.
I stayed there for 2 or 3 days, getting used to working on KP, peeling potatoes, all the great things that you pick up the first couple of weeks in the Army. Yeah. And at that point, a certain number of us got reassigned to go to Fort Hood, Texas. So we climbed on a bus and took about a maybe 8-hour ride to Fort Hood, Texas, and of course arrived there in the middle of the night.
Did you have any idea what the selection process was, why you were chosen to go to Fort Hood?
No, none at all.
And why you were going to Fort Hood?
Fort Hood was home of the 2nd Armored Division,
right.
And at that point in time, it encompassed a lot of things. It encompassed tanks, Army personnel carriers, artillery, all the heavy weapons, and it seemed like that was it was either that or stay in Fort Polk and with the infantry training. So
okay.
I was happy to move to Fort Hood.
So what did you do at Fort Hood when you got there in the middle of the night?
For the first night?
Yeah.
Well, it was the same type of thing. You get shuttled around and get yelled at for a couple hours and end up in a barracks and told to get a good night's sleep. Of course, by then it was probably 4 o'clock in the morning and you weren't going to get much more than an hour's sleep anyway. And then we started the whole basic training routine from the first day haircuts and listening to drill sergeants and standing in lines and drawing gear and clothes and getting ready to be turned into a U.S. soldier.
It was the Armored Division actually doing the basic training? It wasn't a basic training regiment or something like that?
No, it was the Second Armored Division, and I believe at that time I was in a cavalry squadron, was the basic training unit.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah. So how long were you there for basic training?
Basic training was 8 weeks. So that took me about to the end of November, right around Thanksgiving in '66.
Did you qualify with a weapon?
In basic training, I qualified with an M14. Yes.
That's what I was. Not an M16 at that point. You used an
I never
M14.
saw an M16 until I got to Vietnam.
So you 8 weeks there, qualified with an M14, and then where did you? What happened then?
Then I moved to another Second Armored Division company. It was an AIT company. It was called the
AIT standing for?
AIT was the Advanced, either individual or infantry training. I think it was individual training. And then I found out that the military occupational specialty, the MOS I was about to get, was for a 36 Kilo 20, which was a telephone lineman. I thought, my gosh, what does a telephone lineman do? And I was about to find out.
So what does a telephone lineman do?
Well, the training course, the training course lasted about 6 weeks, I believe. And we started out working with basic field telephones, learning how field telephones work, how to make wire splices. But then came the fun part, climbing telephone poles. We climbed those with the spikes strapped to your ankles, and they were poles that had been used probably 10 or 15 years, so they had a lot of splinters sticking out from them. And on occasion, what was called burning a pole, when you slid down a pole unintentionally, when your spikes slipped out of the groove. And when you did that, you were supposed to push away from the pole and not grab it. Well, I've grabbed a few poles in my training, and I was picking out slivers out of my arms for probably a year and a half after that.
Yeah.
But we strung a lot of wire in that 8 weeks training, and learned a lot about communications and communications between armored vehicles. We had some tanks, and we had AP armored personnel carriers in our squadron, and we used those quite a bit in training, and learned a lot of general things.
So the tanks and the APCs, you weren't running wire to them?
No. Well, when they were in locations where they would be there permanently for maybe a day or a week or something, they usually ran wires from there to to whatever headquarters you had, just so they had a secondary means of communications other than radios.
Right. So you finished AIT. How long? What year, month are we at?
Yeah, AIT was either 6 or 8 weeks, so we were pretty close to December. Yeah, possibly. I received a leave over Christmas in 1966 to come home. That was probably a 2-week leave, I think, at that time. And I hadn't quite finished AIT when I took the leave.
No.
So I went back to Texas, finished the training, and stayed in that unit until, about June of 1967 when I got my orders for Vietnam.
Okay. How did you get home at Christmas time? Did you fly back, or did you?
There were enough fellows from Wisconsin that we were able to charter a small plane, and we came back. There were probably 50 guys from Wisconsin, and we chartered a small plane and came back.
Oh. Worked
out rather well.
Yeah. So you finished AIT. Then you had to come back and finish it, and then you got your assignment to Vietnam. Is that
right?
Right out of AIT.
Yes.
Okay. And so, tell me about that. How did you get there?
Well, I got a 30-day leave before I went to Vietnam, which was nice, and I had orders to report to Fort Lewis, Washington, which was kind of the debarkation points for most Army fellows that were going to Vietnam, either California or up in Fort Lewis. And I got there sometime in June of 1967. 67, yes. And I got there flying from Milwaukee to Chicago, I think to Denver, and Denver to Washington. And then whenever you got to the airports, there were always plenty of transportation to get you to Fort Lewis. You know, you just report to the desk there, and they would set up transportation to Fort Lewis.
Okay, 67, were there any protesters at the airport to greet you? Or?
Definitely, yes there were, yeah. They were the people offering you flowers, and then the ones that were kind of yelling about the Vietnam veterans. And of course we were in our uniforms, so yeah, traveling uniform, so we were targets wherever we went, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was...
Kind of disheartening.
You're getting ready to go off to Vietnam and risk your life, and this is how the people were greeting you at the airport.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went to Fort Lewis.
Fort Lewis.
And did you fly from Fort Lewis? Is that what?
Right. I spent about 2 or 3 days in Fort Lewis waiting for transportation to get ready, and we flew from Fort Lewis in a airliner, you know, a modern airliner. Might have been a Braniff, I'm not really sure, but I always remember the colorful fuselages on the Braniff airliners. We flew from Fort Lewis to, I believe it was Alaska, and then we made a stopover in Japan. I think we went from Alaska to Japan, and then from Japan to Cam Ranh Bay.
In a commercial airliner. So you're landing in Vietnam in a combat zone in a commercial airliner.
Yeah. With
flight attendants.
Right, right. That was exciting.
Do you remember the landing at the airfield, what it was like?
We landed during the day. It was a easy landing, a typical commercial airliner landing, a nice soft landing. There was a lot of activity going around all around. Cam Ranh Bay is a very busy airport. A lot of military aircraft taking off and landing. A lot of helicopters flying in and out. It was kind of disorienting to land in that type of thing.
The reason I asked is what I remember is the corkscrew landing. We came in essentially over the airfield at 25,000 feet and then just circled. You don't do a long approach; they did a circular.
Yeah, it's a short approach and kind of a quick drop in a lot of cases.
So you don't have that long approach where you're a target.
Right.
So
of course, Cam Ranh Bay was a fairly secure area. You know, I think if you were coming into maybe something like, I don't know, Pleiku or even the Trang at that point, you might have done a landing like that. But I think Cam Ranh Bay, if you came in out over the water, I think it was.
So you're pre-tech, so you weren't there for. This is before tech.
Yes.
Yeah. So I came in after tech.
Okay.
So a lot of things changed.
They did. Yes.
So how long were you there at Cam Ranh Bay? That's the reception center.
Yeah, I was there maybe 2 or 3 days at the most. From Cam Ranh Bay, they sent us up to, we got...
Did you call it the Repo Depot?
Repo Depot, yes. Yeah. We had our orders, and I went from Cam Ranh Bay to the Trang. And excuse me, I believe we flew to the Trang, I think at a C-130.
Okay. You got your orders to the particular unit you were going to go to. What unit was that?
At that time, it was an artillery. I believe it was 5th Battalion, 27th Artillery, and it was an artillery battalion up in the Tuiwa area, which was still like 2 or 3 jumps after I got in the country.
What division was that?
I don't recall.
No. Okay.
Yeah. It was with the 1st Field Force. No, I'm not sure if it was actually a division.
It probably wasn't part of a division. It was a non-divisional unit. Okay.
Yeah. Where the units of Vietnam were divided up into, I think, 4 corps. Right. And we were with the 1st Field Force of the 1st Corps.
Okay. So it was a non-divisional artillery unit.
Yeah.
And explain where you went to the Trang. Explain again, where is that in relationship with
it's
South
kind
Vietnam?
of up the coast, maybe 50, 75 miles. From the Trang, we boarded another smaller plane and flew up to the Air Force Base at Tuiwa, which was probably about 100 miles from Cam Ranh Bay. It seemed like a lot longer, but it wasn't that far, really, when you look at it on the map. Tuiwa was where the unit I was assigned to had its headquarters company. That was their base camp. They had 3 artillery batteries, that were due west of Tuiwa out in the mountains, and 105 millimeter howitzer. So they were strategically positioned out in the mountains, and the base camp was back in Tuiwa.
Okay.
Tuiwa was also a very large Air Force base. A lot of Cameron Bay, Nha Trang, and Tuiwa were probably the three major Air Force bases, and Phan Rang.
So where did you went to the headquarters company first? It was at the base camp. Is that where you stayed, or did you get assigned?
I continued to be assigned to headquarters company throughout the remainder of the time that I was in Vietnam. I spent about maybe a week kind of getting acclimated to the area. I did a couple different things during that time. I pulled guard duty. We didn't have to pull KP because we had Vietnamese hired as KP. That was a real treat. And I was actually the driver for our communications officer, or captain, for a number of days. And at that point, he had a new job opportunity for me, which I grabbed right away.
So as a driver, what did you drive?
I drove I think it was a M114 Jeep. And at that particular time, we drove out to a number of firing batteries. We took some communications gear out to different people, and just kind of supplied working equipment and returning equipment that wasn't working. So we did that for a short while, and then he got to know me, and he asked me if I wanted to work on a radio relay. And I said, well, what's a radio relay? And then he explained to me the whole concept of military radio communications in the 1960s, where it wasn't bounced off a satellite, it wasn't very good at following the curvature of the earth, it was all line of sight communications. And that meant that the radio signal that would come from base camp to one of our artillery batteries out in the jungle and out on the mountains had to go through a radio relay station, which at this particular time it was placed on the highest mountain in the Tuiwa area, and that signal would bounce from base camp to the radio relay station to the artillery battery. That was the only means of radio communication, unless you happened to get a good day where the atmospheric conditions were just right, where you could make a direct communication. So I took the opportunity, once he explained to me what I was going to be doing, and found out that I'd be living on top of this mountain. The name of the mountain was Chap Chai. There were 3 Americans, and we had 25 Vietnamese for guards. And the only means of reaching the top of the mountain was by helicopter or by climbing up the side of the mountain, which took about 3 hours.
25 guards doesn't sound like a lot in an isolated spot like that.
It wasn't, and it was the highest spot, and we thought it would be a very opportune location for a mortar position or just an observation pit position for the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong.
And did you get attacked at all while you were there at this?
Sniper attacks occasionally. We had our guard posts were set up. We probably had about 8 guard posts around the top of the mountain, and on occasion you'd have stray shots from those. So we had a lot of perimeter defenses. We had claymore mines set up. We had trip flares. We had booby traps with hand grenades. A lot of barbed wire. And the helicopter pad was outside of all of our defenses, so we had to get our supplies and everything from helicopters and carry it in through all the defenses. The main problem we had was the Tet Offensive in 1967, because that's the point in time that I think the enemy decided they wanted the top of the hill.
So before we get to that, let me back up a little bit. What was your daily life like sitting at the top of this isolated hill with 3 Americans? Is it
3 Americans, yeah.
And 25 Vietnamese.
Right.
Talk about your food, your latrines, things like that.
Sure.
What was life like?
It was really a time of getting to know the Vietnamese that we were living with. I'll talk about the Vietnamese first. The Vietnamese were commanded by a second lieutenant, who was a very intelligent man. He spoke French, he spoke English, just a real joy to work with. They had a first sergeant who was the typical tough first sergeant that kept all the men in line. And then they had a couple of sergeants, and all the rest were privates. And, excuse me, let me take a break here.
Take your time.
The Vietnamese had an interesting life. They all had families down in Tuiwa, and they would have a group that would go down every day so they could go back and be with their families. So they probably had about 8 individuals that had opportunity to go down every day back to their families. So they would leave at sunbreak or sunrise in the morning, walk down the hill and go back to their families, and then come back before the sunset in the afternoon. So they had a very busy day going down doing things and then coming back. And they would rotate.
The trek was about 3 hours to get to the bottom?
Yeah, well, 3 hours to come up.
Okay.
Probably about an hour and a half to go down.
Oh, yeah.
And then when they came back, they would bring all their food and everything with them. They supplied their own food. They supplied their own water. They would bring up small, larger than canteens, but smaller than a gallon jug of water. They would bring their own water up. So they would rotate these shifts every couple of days. It wouldn't go down every night, but and it depended a lot on the weather too. During the monsoon season, they didn't go down nearly as much as they did during the normal seasons. They lived in small shacks on top of the hill. We had an area that was cleared on the top of the mountain that was probably about the size of half of a football field, maybe 30 yards wide and 50 yards long. And there were probably a dozen shacks that the Vietnamese used on top of the hill, usually 2 men to a little shack. And they were made out of everything from C-ration cartons and crates to corrugated tin that they somehow carried up. We lived in the absolute life of luxury in the bunker that we lived in. It was built with walls of sandbags, and we had corrugated tin for a roof, and we actually had a door and a screen over our front window, so we were pretty lucky, and we had cots, so we didn't have to sleep on the ground or anything for the time we were there. Supplies and well, I should go back. We had lights inside, a couple of small light bulbs that were taken from vehicles and used tail light type lights. We had one over each bed. Had 2 generators that we ran during the day to charge our batteries. Then at night, when noise control was pretty important, we shut the generators off and just ran the radios and our lights off of the batteries that we had. So we had to be resupplied with what we call POL, petroleum oil and lubricants, on a pretty regular basis. We needed diesel fuel for the generators. We needed gasoline for our small little gasoline stove that we cooked on. We needed water. It became difficult at times when it was based on the weather and we couldn't get supplies. We ended up catching water off of the roof, off of the corrugated tin, and using that to cook our food, whatever food that we were cooking. Our basic diet was 1 meal by ourselves of C-rations every day, 1 meal with the Vietnamese, with whatever they were cooking, and then we gave them the equivalent of 1 meal of C-rations for each man for a meal they could cook themselves. And they usually took whatever we gave them, mixed it with a lot of rice, and made their meals that way. But it was pretty much a diet of C-rations for the good part of 9 months when I was up there.
So, and you and then you ate Vietnamese food that they'd prepared too? Is that
we did, which was...
How did you like that?
It was interesting. You usually didn't have a real good handle on what you were eating. The first project I had to do when I got there was make myself a pair of chopsticks, because everything you had, when you ate with the Vietnamese, they really frowned upon you using forks and spoons. They like to see you eating out of a little bowl with chopsticks, like the way they did. Mm-hmm. So that's what we did. We ate with chopsticks, and their meals usually consisted of some greens, a lot of rice, a little bit of their famous Nuckman sauce, which is kind of a conglomeration of fish parts that are kind of, I guess they're almost like spoiled fish oil, and really gives a pungent taste and a very different taste to anything that you're eating. So we had that with them. Very seldom did we have any meat. Some types of fish once in a while. Unknowingly, I had a lovely meal of dog at one point. They told me that after I ate it. So it was interesting eating with them. But I think it developed a bond between us and them because we were kind of living at the same level that they were. And it was a struggle to have water on a lot of times. And they had no generators. They had no lights in any of the places they were living in. They had a sea ration can with a candle in it. I mean, that was the amount of heat or light they had in their little huts that they had built. So they had, they had a better time than a lot of the guys that were living out in the jungles and in the mountains. But it was still a rough existence for them. It was tough for the soldiers.
What did you make the chopsticks out of? You said you made chopsticks.
I think we had like hand grenade cases or something that we used. We had leftover wood from things like that. We used to get hand grenades like in, I don't know, cases with about 50, and they'd have a very solid wooden frame built to it. On some occasions, they dropped them out of a helicopter to us, so you knew that they were built pretty solid if they could stand a drop like that. Yeah, and on times when we needed wood for building things, like they had a latrine that was built up there, and one of the daily things they had to take care of, and it was kind of on the backside of our mountain. And that's the picture of the latrine is in some of the pictures that I've attached to this. And when I got there, it was just kind of a box on the back of the hill with a bucket under it. And so we made some improvements so that we put a back on it, because on occasion when you sat up on that thing, you were in direct line of sight of anybody that was below us on the mountain. And I heard a few things go whizzing past my head when I was sitting on it, and we decided to put a little back to it. Not that it would protect you from anything, but it would just kind of obscure your outline against the night sky. So we did that, and on occasion we'd have to burn the residue that was in there and clean that out. As I'm sure just about everybody in Vietnam had to do at one point or not. So we needed some wood for that they were nice enough to send up on a helicopter on one of our resupplies. And then during the monsoon season, or shortly after the monsoon season, because during the monsoon season you could walk outside and take a shower anytime. I mean, you'd walk out with your bar of soap and take a shower. But after the monsoon season ended, we built a shower towards the back of our bunker on the outside, and it was really cold up there. You wouldn't think of being in the jungle was cold, but you'd be up in the during the day it might be 100, 110, but at night if it got down into 60 or 65 degrees, it felt like you were just freezing. So in the morning, sometimes a nice hot shower would feel good. So we had a 5-gallon GI water container with a little spigot welded on the bottom with a shower head, so we could heat the water on our little stove in our tea kettle, for maybe 2 hours and get enough water to take a warm shower. So that was pretty exciting to do that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about sanitation, but you've covered all that, so that's good. Sea rations. Did you ever get any fresh food? Did they ever drop in anything fresh for you?
We had fresh food on, I believe it was Thanksgiving. The sergeant major and one of the colonels brought us up a Thanksgiving meal, and I think we got something also on Christmas, but it was just those 2 times that we got regular Army food.
How long were you up there?
About 9 months. 9 months.
Did you ever break in the 9 months? Did you go on R&R, anything like that, or?
An interesting thing about R&R, I had the opportunity to go on R&R, but I did not have a guarantee that I'd come back to where I was. And I liked it where I was. When I first went up there, we had a sergeant that was in charge of the 3 of us, and when he left, I, as a Spec 4, was in charge of the 3 of us. So we enjoyed our kind of our exclusivity up there. We were by ourselves. As long as we did our job and functioned well, nobody bothered us. So I decided that it wasn't worth a chance of getting put out in one of the firing batteries or working in base camp just to forego the R&R and to stay up there for the whole 9 months. We did go down about once a month. We took the hike down into town. We go down and we get a haircut because, you know, whenever the officers came up to pay us, you know, they'd bring us up our monthly stipend for being up there. They had to make sure that we were getting haircuts. So we go down to town about once a month and get a haircut and maybe have a meal in one of the little restaurants in town. But we go down by ourselves, which was always kind of a risky thing. Hitch a ride into town, which was about maybe 2 miles, and hopefully hitch a ride back at the end of the day, and then walk up with the guards at night.
So I'm wrapping my head around. So you'd walk down, just the three of you walk down the hill together?
Oh no, only one could go at a time.
Only one could go at a time.
Right, we had to keep a two-man crew up there at all times.
Okay, so you always had somebody up there. So you decided you needed a haircut. One of you, would you go down with the Vietnamese, or did you go down?
I walked down with the guards in the morning.
You walked down with the Vietnamese.
And walk back up with the guards in the afternoon.
Okay, good. I feel better now. I think I'm just as a guy walking down the trail by himself. So you went with the Vietnamese, and who cut your hair? Did you go?
I just went into town, and the local barber would cut my hair. Yeah.
Good. That's a whole different life. I mean, and you were essentially, that was it for 9 months. That was your routine of doing that over.
Yeah. And our basic daily duty was to do a morning report. Towards the end of my time there, we had an automatic radio relay that when the firing battery would call base camp, it would go through us, but it would go through an automatic relay, and we didn't have to do anything except make sure it worked.
Right.
But in the beginning, all the reports and everything had to be done manually. So we had probably a 3-foot by 4-foot acetate covered board where we'd list the round shot, incoming mortar to the base, to the artillery batteries, KIAs, WIAs, all the things that they'd have to have in their morning report to headquarters company will come through us. So we developed a really good feel of what was going on with our firing batteries.
So they would transmit it to you, you would record it, and then you'd retransmit it back to the base?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So
it was a manual relay.
Right. That was before the automatic system got put into place. So once they put the automatic system in, we just had to make sure that we had our radios up and running when they sent the reports.
And you could hear what was going on.
Yes.
So you still kept up to date.
Right. It was an audible report. So we always had to have one fellow that was ready during the night. When we each took a night shift, and we slept usually during the day. And we tried to keep awake as much as we could during the night. And during the day, we'd put on our shorts and our t-shirts, and we'd walk around the hill just like regular people. And at night, we put on our boots and our military clothes and work the radio relay at night.
So there's no sergeant there telling you guys are out of uniform. You need to get a little bit more spick and span.
Nighttime was not the time to be putting boots on.
Yeah. Good. So you started to talk about Tet, and I cut you off because I wanted to have more of the detail what daily life was like. What happened during Tet? You think
during
things
Tet?
changed? Yeah, I think you were alluding to the fact that things changed.
Right. During Tet, which I believe was on February 2nd, I think that's the day that they celebrate Tet, we were having a celebration with the Vietnamese.
And this was 1968.
Yes. And they brought up a lot of different foods. They had different candies. They brought like a regular feast up for all of us to join in with them. And we were shooting off flares, and we were having a good old time. And about maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, up until that time, everybody was shooting off flares, and we had a prison that was right at the base of our camp. And you could see the guys there were shooting off flares, and they were having a good time, the prison guards. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, we saw that the tracers that were going in the air up until that point were now going out across the rice paddies. Our mountain was circled by rice paddies on 3 sides, and there was the Highway 1 was on the east side, which ran right along the base of our mountain. And beyond that, about 6 blocks away was the South China Sea. So we were pretty close to the coast. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, the tracers, the green tracers started coming in, and the red tracers started going out, and pretty much everything was being attacked at that time. The prison, the artillery batteries, our batteries out in the field were being attacked, and kind of around maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, and I think that was the time that it took the guys that were down in the rice paddies to make their way up the hill, that they started to mortar us. And that was the only time that we actually had any mortars hit up and around our hill. And that happened until maybe about 6 o'clock. And by that point, we had some sappers that were cutting through the wires. And we had kind of a free-for-all on top of our mountain. We had, they were mainly North Vietnamese, uniformed troops. They were on the far end of our mountain. They had come up the backside of the mountain, which we thought was impassable because it was pretty much of a sheer cliff. And they had come up the backside of our mountain. We had probably a dozen of them up on this area that was 30 yards by 50 yards. And we set up our machine gun in the door of our bunker, and it was pretty crazy for a couple hours. And right around daybreak, everything broke off, and the ones that were left up there kind of faded off into the early morning light. And we were left with a bunch of our Vietnamese guards that were killed, and a lot of shell casings laying around. a lot of action went on. A number of North Vietnamese were killed right outside of our bunker, and a lot of hand grenades were used. And about that time, our headquarters companies started getting worried for our safety up there. They were worried that 25 Vietnamese couldn't protect us if they had to because of the way they broke through the wires. So we stayed up there probably for about 2 weeks after that. And during this time, they developed advancements in radio. So now I don't think they were using satellites, but the radios were somehow able to follow the curvature of the Earth, so they could actually radio from the base camp out to the firing batteries. So they decided that they were going to pull us off of there. And one morning we got a call saying that pack your bags. We're going to have helicopters pulling you out of there. I think it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Before we go there, I want to go back to Ted a little bit, because you talked about your living. You had a structure that you lived in,
right?
And all three of you lived in the same structure.
Yes.
But you hadn't mentioned bunkers before just now. So did you have bunkers that you were responsible for versus the Vietnamese?
Yeah, we had two bunkers. We had a standalone bunker that was outside of our door, and we had an M60 machine gun installed on there, and we didn't man that one during Tet because they had gotten through the wire so quickly. Our part of the hill was fairly secure. We just set up our machine gun right outside of our door. We had a blast wall built outside of our bunker with sandbags, and we set it up on top of that. And we just kind of went back and forth across the top. But it was difficult because we couldn't tell which were our guards and which were the attackers.
That's what I was going to say. You're sort of probably in the center.
And it was still dark.
And it was still dark, and you're sort of in the center, and I assume the Vietnamese were around you somehow?
They were, yeah.
And they had bunkers?
Their bunkers were basically on the perimeter of the top of the mountain. And by that time, the perimeter had kind of broken down. So it was pretty much a free-for-all on top of the mountain.
Of the 20 or so Vietnamese you had, how many were casualties?
About 5. There were a number of injuries. So, as soon as daybreak came in, well, then we started bringing in medevacs and taking the Vietnamese out. We were very lucky, the three of us. We had no injuries or anything. We came through it very well.
Did the Vietnamese KIA, were they wounded?
About 5 were.
5 were KIAs.
Yeah.
And
about an even number North Vietnamese.
About 5 or so.
Yeah. I don't know how. I don't think there were any more than a dozen that attacked us. It was maybe a squad or something. It was small, but they scared us. Scared us a lot.
No, especially if you've been up there all this time and had this.
And it was quiet.
You had a nice quiet life going on, and
Yeah. So that
Did
takes
you have
us
any
like,
training in the M60 machine gun, or is this the first time you
no,
guys
no.
fired it?
When I first got there, we all qualified with the M16 and with a 45 caliber pistol, and
Okay.
we had quite an assortment of weapons up there. We had 45 calibers, we had M16s, we had two M60s, and we had a couple of old World War II trench guns, 12 gauge shotguns. So we had quite a bit of
For
equipment.
the three of you, you were all like Rambo up there.
Yeah, a lot of. We probably had 50 claymores around the perimeter of the camp. Probably 100 trip flares. The Vietnamese first sergeant set up a lot of booby traps on the outside. He was kind of an expert at that,
Mm-hmm.
and we just got him all the equipment, and he took care of everything for us.
Okay. So I wanted to go back to that. Now you were just starting to talk about when they decided they didn't need you guys up there anymore.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it was they liked having us there in case there was a problem with transmissions,
Mm-hmm.
but I think they were afraid that maybe that was more than 3 Americans could bite off safely. So they made a decision to move us and the communications captain and a platoon sergeant about 150 miles south to the Phan Rang Air Base, and we were going to direct artillery for the Phan Rang Air Base. We did a lot of artillery direction for the time we were up there too, because we could see mortar flashes and the rice paddies around us. Being so high as we were, it was pretty easy to call an artillery fire.
Did you have training as a forward observer?
Oh, JT.
On the job training.
On the job training.
Of how to be a forward observer.
Exactly.
And call in artillery.
Yep.
Do you remember some of the things you would do? Explain what it's like to call in artillery. What was it like?
First thing last light, we'd usually have registration fire, and we had the 3 105 millimeter howitzer battalions that we worked with, and we would call in registration fire around the base of the hill in the rice paddies. So we had points that if we saw mortar flashes or somebody called in artillery for those areas, we could plot on our maps where the registration fire was and then move the artillery from that based on the fire positions that we knew. We called in artillery fire from quite a few groups. The Vietnamese had a 155 millimeter group on one side of our mountain. The Vietnamese, the Korean were the 155s. The Vietnamese had an 8-inch gun on the other side of the mountain, so we could call those in if we had to. But they were usually too close to call anything within our local areas. When there was a lot of fire missions going on, we could have a 155 blowing across the mountain from one side and an 8-inch going from the other side, and it sounded like 2 freight trains going over at the same time. And then a few seconds or minutes later, you'd hear the concussion coming from out in the jungle or the mountains, and it was interesting. But we'd register fire, and then we'd base our fire missions on that. We even called in a fire mission from a Navy rocket ship at one time.
No.
That was pretty exciting. We saw a platoon of either Viet Cong or NVAs walking down the beach, and we called in a naval fire because they were right along the shore, and they used I don't know what kind of ship it was, but like the whole side of it lit up with rockets coming off it. It was phenomenal.
Especially how high was the mountain? You've talked about you could see
we
everything.
were,
you remember how
about
high it was?
400 meters,
Okay.
which is 1,200
feet.
1,200 feet. So it was between 1 and 2 miles high.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we were the highest point on the coast of Vietnam along Highway 1.
Makes you a good target. Everybody knows where you are.
So we thought.
That's what I would.
Kind of an interesting thing also, when the Air Force was bombing and strafing around the Viet Cong prison camp that was located at the bottom of our hills, the jets would drop their ordnance, and they would come up the side of the hill, and I swear the pilots could wave at us when they came up the side of the hill. It was phenomenal. It was just really amazing to see that.
So you moved from there to, I forgot the name of the base you went to.
We moved to Phan Rang Air Base.
Phan Rang. And so you're your job sort of changed from that. You weren't doing a relay station anymore.
Right. And then now we were working in in the 35th Security Police Squadron. I guess you would call it communications room. We had field telephones, we had radios, so we had communications with all the perimeter guards around the airbase. And it was kind of the control center for the whole base. And from that, the Air Force, the 7th Air Force, would direct reaction squads, I guess, to any part of the base that would be attacked or would need extra support. They would call in air support if they need that. They would call in artillery support if they needed that. And our main artillery support unit that we worked at that time was the Korean 155s. So it was the White Horse Division, the Korean White Horse Division. And we had one of our 3 men. He was posted with the Koreans, and the other 2 of us were with the Air Force, the Americans. And his job was, my job was to relay whatever he had coming in from the Koreans, whatever information they had, and then I would relay back to him what the fire mission was. So our job was still, in effect, a relay business. We were still relaying information back and forth. And we did that for about 2 months. And that was living in the life of luxury. We lived in the Air Force barracks. We ate in the Air Force mess hall. We had hooch maids that would shine our shoes and make our beds and clean our floors. We had...
Well, they weren't air conditioned, were they?
No.
No, okay. Just want to see how comfortable it was.
No, it wasn't quite that comfortable. We did have fans in the communication center that we used, and that was even a treat in itself. But we had outdoor movie theaters. I got to see Bob Hope and Anne Margaret while I was there. We had a swimming pool that I never went to, but there was a swimming pool on the air base, a library. I mean, this was like stateside living compared to what we did for the last 9 months.
So you came 9 months of sea rations and Vietnamese food, and now you're down there going to the mess hall.
It was wonderful.
Did you have 3 hot meals a day?
We did. And we, on occasion, we would, we spent most of our working time from about 3 o'clock till midnight. So we worked like a 9-hour shift, and then another group would come in. But during the day, we had a 3/4 ton pickup that we would take down to the beach. And so we'd make a beach run every day. We got shot at a couple times, but we made the beach run every day, and that was really a wonderful thing. And they had a burger joint down there where you could get hamburgers and beer, and life was good.
And you're on the South China Sea? Is that where the
South
beach
China
is?
Sea, yeah. Only thing you had to watch off there was for the man of war, the jellyfish.
Yeah, yeah. But you had a place to get burgers on the beach.
We did, yeah.
And this was about probably, let's see, 1968, late May or so?
May or June, yeah.
Of 68, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it was a wonderful way to wrap up a year there. I mean,
Yeah.
It was a wonderful duty, and the Air Force fellows that we worked with were just great. I mean, we're 3 Army guys living in the Air Force barracks. You'd think maybe they would resent us a little bit, but it was wonderful. They were really a great group of people.
Good, good. So what happened when how long were you there doing this?
Between 2 and 3 months.
Okay.
Which takes me up until about July, I think. July of 1968 was when I came home. Then I had a leave when I returned. Well, coming home was another story in itself. I mean, that was wonderful, getting back on the jet and flying back home. Just a whole plane of successful returnees coming back.
A commercial flight again. It wasn't
commercial flight back to back to Fort Lewis again, another reception station, and we came back in our khakis at that particular time. Even though it was almost winter, we came back in our short sleeve khakis, and we got re-outfitted for a new uniform, dressed green. So when we got back to Fort Lewis with all of our ribbons and patches and everything else, and looked really good, and had a good meal in the reception station there. Had a steak meal that everybody usually gets when they get there, and drank some milk. And milk was a problem for me for years after I came back. I had all kinds of digestive problems from milk, and I think it had something to do with all the crazy stuff I ate during the time in Vietnam.
Well, did you ever get sick from the food, or did you ever have any intestinal problems?
No, not
dealing
really.
with being out there?
One of the fellow that originally ran our station, he came down with yellow jaundice, and so we all had the medic came up and they gave us, I think it was gamoglobin shots or something like that.
Hurts like hell.
And he had to go down to the hospital in Tuiwa, and he ended up going home after that. He was really sick. But Dennis D. Casper, remember him well.
Did you have to take malaria pills? Were you in there?
Yeah, we took malaria pills every day, and we took the little ones every day and the big ones once a week. And we had our bottle of APCs, all-purpose cures, that the medic set up for us for headaches or backaches or whatever we had. And we kind of...
Do you know what APC actually stands for?
No.
I don't remember all. A is for the aspirin. The C is for caffeine. It had caffeine in it.
The other one's
I
codeine.
forget what the P was.
Codeine.
Probably. I don't know. Yeah. So it was an upper. I mean, that was...
Yeah, there was something in them.
And they passed them out like they were candy.
Took care of headaches, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So when we had problems like that, we more or less just let the medical people in base camp know what we were seeing, and we did have stomach disorders, and they sent up some type of big bottle of some gold-colored stuff that took care of the problems.
You know, when you're 19 years old, you just do whatever they told you to do.
That's right.
Nobody questioned it. So when you came back, did you go right into Fort Lewis, or did you fly into a commercial airport? Did you go into... And again, I was going to get to protesters and things like that. Were you you said you ran into them
leaving. We landed, I think, in a military airport, and they took us back to Fort Lewis by bus right away.
So you didn't run into...
No, I didn't see any of those until I went through reception station and went back to the airport for flights home. And then it was the same as it was when I went over, except worse. I mean, there were more protesters and more people yelling at you. And I ran into some really nice people. I stopped in the bar, and I was going to have a beer before I came back.
Uniform? Or
I was in uniform, yeah. And I ran into a lady and gentleman that were sitting at the bar, and they wanted to buy me a drink. They saw I was coming back from Vietnam, and we had a real nice discussion with them, and they were very nice people. They wanted to hear about my experiences and where I was going and what I planned to do after the service. And that kind of tempered all the other things and made the experience not quite as bad as it could have been.
Yeah. So was this the end of your tour in the Army? Were you discharged then, or was that? Or did you
no,
go someplace else?
I came back from Vietnam before they had the 90-day early out, and I had just about 90 days exactly left in the service. Okay. And so I went home for a short leave, and I got reassigned to Fort Hood, Texas.
Back to Fort Hood.
Back to Fort Hood. So I got there. I don't recall exactly when it was, but it was probably at the end of July, and I spent August and September at Fort Hood, pretty much going through the whole process of getting out of the Army during that whole time. I was assigned to a company, and I had a report for morning formation and afternoon formation, but my day was pretty much going to all the different places that you had to attend to and talk to before you left the service. And that took pretty much 2 months that I was there. Yeah. I mean, it was ridiculous.
So again, sort of a good way to leave the Army. You didn't have a lot of responsibilities.
Spent a lot of time at the PX, a lot of time at the pool.
And there's not very many towns around Fort Hood, so you probably stayed on the base most of the time? Did you get into the...
Yeah, Killeen, Texas was the closest little town. Killeen, and I can't recall the other Texas city that we used to go to, but I had a car at that point. I drove a car back to Fort Hood, so a number of us were able to go out on the weekends or on 3-day passes and visit some of the little towns around there. It was okay.
Okay.
It was hot. Texas is typically a very hot area, and I think being there before I went to Vietnam kind of got me used to the warm climates, because it was always hot in Texas.
Mm-hmm. So they discharged you directly from Fort Hood, or did you have to go someplace else?
No, I discharged from Fort Hood, okay. 28 September of '68.
So exactly 2 years after you were
Yeah,
drafted.
yeah. They were pretty good about doing that back then. I mean, they went by the numbers on that.
Good. So then you went home.
Then I went home.
Let me see what I've got to pick up my kids. Let's see if you did everything. How many? Okay, so now I'm back toward the end of this. So we talked about when you departed service. What did you do when you got home? So this question actually is, did you go back to work, college, get married? What happened?
I could have gone back.
Maybe it was a free-form question.
I could have gone back to my job at Harness Shager, but I didn't. So 2 weeks after I left the service on 20th of September. October 12th, I was married.
Oh.
So while I was in the service, before I left for Vietnam, Diane and I became engaged. And while I was there, she and her mother planned our wedding. So all I really had to do was show up for the wedding and get my tux and be there on October 12th. So we spent a little bit of time during that 2-week period. At that point, she was still in school in Madison, University of Wisconsin, in the nursing college. And she was 68, she was a junior in school by that time. So she was coming towards the end of her education. And we had our wedding on October 12th, and I think that was a Saturday. So on Monday, we drove back to Madison, and I moved what little things I had into her apartment. And no honeymoon, right to Madison. And I think it was maybe the next week I started looking for a job, because she was going to school and working a little bit at the university hospital, and we had to have some more money coming in to pay for an apartment.
Was she putting herself through college, or her parents?
No, her parents were paying for it. Yeah. And so I started looking around in Madison, and I went to the Gisholt Machine Company, which in that time was one of the two largest employers in Madison. Oscar Mayer was the first one, and Gisholt was the second one. And Gisholt made large lathes for turning materials, and at that time they were making a lot of lathes for the Navy to make gun barrels for machines. So I was hired on there as a draftsman, kind of a low-level draftsman. I didn't have any college education, and was working on different aspects of engineering.
Well, you had 6 months or 6 weeks or something.
Yeah. Right. 6 months to do the job. And, at that time, being a draftsman, really, there was no computer work involved. We worked with slide rules and T-squares and made drawings on drawing boards. And it was an interesting job, and I learned a lot about shop practices and about office life and things like that. And I worked there for I think it was about a year until Diane graduated from college. And then we packed what little stuff we had and moved back to Milwaukee, where she was going to start work as a nurse in one of the hospitals in Milwaukee, and I was going back to college to start over in college again. So
let me go back to being a draftsman. What kind of, because you're a junior draftsman, what did they have you working on? How did they use your talents? And
I was at that time I was a detailed draftsman, and so I'd work on small parts, welded items, work on standards, standard products that have to be put on a drawing, and then all different sizes listed under it. Just the basic entry forms of engineering type work.
Yeah.
So I would do whatever the project engineer told me to do.
Right, exactly. Did you find it interesting, though?
I did. It was very interesting.
It didn't sound like it was routine kinds of things.
It was a lot like the job I had before I went into the service. So it was good that I had that initial training that showed me, how the function of a mechanical engineering type job really worked.
Oh, okay. So your wife graduated from college, had a job in Milwaukee.
Yes.
You were out of work. You didn't have a job. You're living off, your wife is supporting you.
If you have no job, you go to school.
So you went to, we've already talked about, you and I talked about, where did you go to school?
Well, with the aid of the GI Bill, if it wouldn't have been for the GI Bill, we would have been in dire straits. I was able to go to the Milwaukee School of Engineering to pursue a degree in mechanical engineering. I had a few courses that had applied from the first time I went to University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, but basically I had to start out from a freshman course at the school. And I was able to get some state grants and some federal grants that really made our life easier. I mean, we could use her money to pay for the apartment and our living expenses, and all of mine could go towards my education.
Were you old for that time, or were there a lot of other veterans going to school that were freshmen?
I started in '71, so I was about 24. So I was old for a college freshman.
Or were there a lot of other veterans at the same time, or were you just one of the older people going there?
There were some, not many in the engineering classes. Okay. MSOE was a fairly small engineering school at that time. Right now it's almost a co-ed school. At that time there were no women in the courses. The classes were maybe 12 to 15 people as opposed to 150 at a state school. So it was the kind of school I was looking for. Yeah. And so I started there in 1971. And the first step towards my degree was I received an associate degree in 1973 in industrial engineering. And I was able to apply all those courses towards the 4-year bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering that I received in '73. Oh. So it worked well, and I was very lucky.
Between 71 and 73, in the 2-year period, you were able to get a bachelor's degree?
No, I got an associate degree in 2 years. Okay. And I was able to apply that as the first 2 years towards my bachelor's degree.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah, which I got in '73. Okay. And I was lucky not having to work during that time. I was able to apply all my efforts towards graduating school. Good. So let's see.
So you graduated, when did you graduate from MSOE?
1973.
With a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering?
Yes. Yeah, BSME. And
so now it's time to find a job.
Yeah, no, I was working on that during the last year. At that time, jobs were plentiful for engineers. I mean, it was pretty much choose whatever job you wanted. And we had a lot of companies that were in the MSOE doing interviews. I interviewed with probably 5 or 6 companies, and I got, I think, 3 or 4 job offers. Wow.
Do you remember what the companies were? Or,
well, Square D, which is where I originally took the job, which is a manufacturer of electrical control devices. The other one was, let's see now, they're located down in Racine, and they make lawn and garden equipment. Not Toro.
Not Deere.
No, not Deere. I can't think of the name right now. And then I had one other offer as well. But I took the job from Square D because they offered me a bonus.
Uline's down there, but they probably weren't. No.
And they offered me a bonus because I was graduating as an honor graduate.
Well, good for you.
They gave you a bonus for that. So I took the job with Square D, and I started there like 2 days after I graduated.
And they're located in Milwaukee?
They're located in Milwaukee, yeah.
I've heard of the company. I don't know that much about it, but the name is familiar.
They had the engineering plant in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they had manufacturing plants in North and South Carolina. So I got to travel back and forth between Carolinas and Square D in Milwaukee quite a bit. And my time, I started there as a design engineer and did a lot of lab testing, working in the lab, working on competitive devices, designs of new devices. And it was a really good job for a young guy just out of school, kind of learning how to compare competition, and how to make your equipment better based on the competition. I used that later on in my engineering career quite a bit.
What kind of things were they making? You probably said that.
Yeah, they made starters for electric motors, where you would start a high voltage electric motor with like a 110 volt circuit. So it was called motor starters. They made lighting starters. They made electrical push buttons and controls, limit switches, pretty much anything that would operate electrical machinery. Okay.
And so you look at competitors, and so you're comparing what the competitors had and what they had and help them.
Yeah, the first 6 months there, I should move back a point. The first number of weeks, probably the first 6 weeks I was there, I went through a sales engineer training course, which was really valuable because you got to work with all the equipment and set up things and simulated industrial control simulations. Learn a lot about sales presentations. We had to make sales presentations, and it really brought the engineer in from a different standpoint, coming in through the sales area of the company. So I did that for the first 6 weeks or so that I was there.
Not very many engineers are good at sales.
No. They also aren't very good at talking to people. But, so after that, I worked as a design engineer under a project and a product engineer. And they kind of directed your actions, and I did what, again, kind of like the military career, you learn to do what you're told. Mm-hmm. And I think I spent about a year and a half at Square D, and sometime in 1974, there was a big downturn. I think it was a downturn in the whole economy at that time.
Yeah, that's when we had the oil embargo and...
they were laying off
how much gas you could have and things like that.
Yeah, they were laying off whole levels of people in their engineering departments, and I lasted quite a while. You know, there were a lot of people I went before I did, but eventually I was laid off as well, and lost my job there as an engineer. So put me back in the job looking force again, and I looked for probably a couple of weeks. And I was looking again at engineering, something in Milwaukee. We didn't want to move. And at that time, I went to interview at Rex Chain Belt. And Rex Chain Belt was a company that made a lot of chain drive things. And had a very favorable interview with the employment manager there. He said, I just don't have anybody that's interested right now, but I can send you to Bucyrus Erie. I know somebody there. And he said they're all also located in Milwaukee, but in South Milwaukee, and they're hiring engineers. So he called somebody that he knew, and he set up an appointment with me. And the guy said, "Sure, come on down tomorrow."
So you interviewed with one company. They didn't have a position for you, but he set you up with an interview with another company.
Yeah, he called another company for me.
That's the Midwest.
Yeah, very nice thing happened. Yeah. And so I went down and I interviewed with Bucyrus Erie Company, and at that time they were a manufacturer of, again, large mining and construction equipment, similar to what I was doing at Harness Shaker. And I had an interview with the corporate HR person, and it was a very favorable interview. It took maybe a half a day. And he said, I think we can offer you something, but we're going to have you interview with our construction machinery division, which is located in Sturtevant, which is between Milwaukee and Racine, south of Milwaukee. And everything's getting further and further away from our house. So,
are you living north Milwaukee?
Yeah, right. So I went down the next day, interviewed for a job, and I interviewed with their human resources person, and then I interviewed with 3 chief engineers. And he called me back the next day, and he said, "Well, you did pretty well." He said, "All 3 of them liked you. All 3 of them are offering you a job. Wow. Who'd you like to work for?"
So you get to choose.
So I picked the person I worked for, and it developed into a really great position. I ended up working for Bucyrus Erie for almost 18 years on 2 separate occasions.
Can you say the name again and maybe spell it? I'm having a little trouble with
BucyrusErie.
Okay.
And I worked there on 2 separate occasions, once for 8 years and once for 9 years. And the beginning in different levels of engineering, design engineering, project engineering, product engineering, development engineering. And the second time I was there, I was the corporate product safety manager.
Wow.
So I got to stand up for a lot of things that me and my engineers designed earlier in my career, in depositions and in court testimony.
Wow.
So I was investigating accidents, and it was really an interesting career.
Wow.
I really enjoyed that.
You said now it's 2 different careers. Obviously there's a break someplace and you did something in between, because you described it as 2 different times.
Right. The first position I took, I was working for the construction machinery division. And in 1982, they decided to move the division to Erie, Pennsylvania. And it was a really tough decision at that time to decide to leave the company or stay with the company. And we just weren't that impressed with Erie, Pennsylvania at that time, so we decided that I was going to leave the company at that time. So I stayed with the division in Racine and pretty much ended up boxing everything up and turning off all the lights and making sure everything was gone. Yeah. And then I started a different job the day after that. I started working for an advertising company.
Okay, that's a completely different career. Before we get to that, what was going on in your personal life at this time? If you had any children or anything like that? Yeah, I don't want to lose track of that. And,
yeah,
I thought maybe it might be good to talk about that.
By that time, we had a son that was about 2 in 1975 and a daughter that was about to be born about that same time. Okay. Second child.
And your wife is still working at the same hospital that she started with?
She was still working at the same hospital.
She had job stability.
Oh, she did.
Well,
yeah. And so at that time, we decided that it would be time for me to look for a new job. And luckily, her father, owned an advertising company here in Milwaukee. Ah, okay. And he'd been working with a contract engineer, doing a lot of their design work, things like that, for many years. And he always said, someday we'll have enough work where we'll bring you into the company, you can do engineering here. So they made me an offer, I took it, and I ended up being the only engineer at the company.
Working with your father-in-law?
Well, not really, with other people mainly. But I designed all the sign structures around Milwaukee, whether they were the big high-rise ones or the ones that straddle the roof of a building. Oh. I ran the construction crews, I ran the painting crews, and I ran the electricians. So I had about 30 people working for me all of a sudden. And I did that for probably about 8 years, 8 or 9 years. And he decided he was going to retire. He broke his company into 2 different parts, and I stayed with the billboard company, the outdoor advertising company, and it was sold. And he said, "Oh yeah, job stability, no problem." Week after he sold the company, the new owners decided that all family members were going to be let go, so I lost the job. So this was about 1982. I was out back looking for jobs again. So I still had friends at Bucyrus, Erie, so I started talking to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're looking for people right now." So I went back and interviewed again, and got a job in the mining division of the company. And I was working in the mining division, and I did that for about a year until this opportunity of being corporate product safety manager came up, and I developed some friends that were kind of feeding information, and they were part of that division, and they got me in for an interview, and I was lucky enough to get that job, and I did that for almost 8 years.
Wow.
That brought me up until about 1990.
So you're dealing with heavy equipment, obviously, with mining equipment, things like that. So you said you're involved in litigation sometimes.
Yes.
I assume anytime there's an accident, somebody probably wanted to blame the
usually an accident with a death or a very serious injury. I'd have to go out and investigate the accidents and write reports and ultimately choose a corporate counsel. We had corporate counsels that were in-house, but we had to pick up people that were local counsels that would handle the litigation and that type of thing, and the investigation. So the corporate counsel and I would choose that person, and then I would go out for accident investigations and depositions. I'd sit in on other people's depositions, and I'd be the corporate expert, the corporate product expert. And I did that for, well, I did that till 2000. That's what it was, until 2000.
That must have been interesting. Is there any one of those cases that is of particular interest that you'd like to recount, or?
Well, the ones that were
give people an idea of what kind of things.
Sure, the ones that were the most troublesome were the boom disassembly accidents. Oh. And at that time, the booms were mainly a lattice work, as opposed to the tubular booms that we have today. They were lattice booms, and to extend them, you had to take them apart and add sections to them. Now, to take them apart, you were supposed to take these long 150-foot booms and put them on blocks so they wouldn't fall. Kind of an obvious thing. Mm-hmm. And there were instructions to doing that, but brevity is always the problem in something like this, where somebody's trying to beat the clock or do it quicker. And they would get under the booms and knock the bottom pins out of the booms. The boom itself would drop, usually on the person that was standing underneath them. And in many cases, it was a death. Mm-hmm. And during my time there, I investigated probably a dozen cases like that. And they were all really sad because they were easily avoided.
Yeah, yeah.
And we didn't always come out good on the cases. I mean, sometimes awards were made, and it was difficult when you see somebody that's been killed or someone that's been hurt. Hurt was a devastating type of accidents they could have. You want to do something for them, but you still want to
protect the company,
yeah. Which was my job.
Yeah. So, as I said, it sounds like a fascinating job,
yeah.
But a lot of stress too, I imagine.
It was a lot of stress,
yeah.
And that was one of the reasons I was glad to leave there.
Yeah.
And again, I had found an old friend that was working for a trade association, and the trade association is one that handles a lot of things for different companies that are in the same production area. I worked in the technical area, and we brought all their engineers, experts from all the different companies together who discussed common problems and regulations and that type of thing. And we had meetings all over the world. I mean, these were companies that were German-based and Swiss-based, and we just really had a good group of people to work with. And I did a lot of traveling during that time, a lot of training, ran a lot of meetings, went to a lot of trade shows. And I did that for 9 years until I retired in 2009.
Wow. So you had you had 8 years. It sounded like it was an 8 year, 9 years, and
yeah,
then
they were
so you had long tours. You didn't change jobs that frequently.
No, and I really didn't change the area of expertise that I was working in that much either.
And you're still living out in Milwaukee. Still stayed in Milwaukee.
Still.
Same house?
No, we moved.
Your kids didn't you didn't raise your kids in the same house though.
No, there's probably only been really 3 houses since we have 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and yeah, there's 3 years. We live west of Milwaukee in Brookfield. It's one of the suburbs, I guess, between Milwaukee and Madison area.
Yeah.
Very comfortable, very nice.
And then you retired. What did you say you retired?
I retired in 2009, so I've been retired 10 years.
And you're still there in Milwaukee?
I am.
So you're just out here on vacation?
I am.
Let me see.
I did consulting work for a number of companies for about 3 years after I retired, which was really a good thing to do. And by the end of that 3-year period, I had enough extra working, so I decided to call that quits.
So I'm looking here. We've talked about how you've got 3 children. Did you name your children? You probably did, but I probably did.
No, I don't think I did. There was Timothy, Lisa, and Kristen.
Okay. And are they all still in the Milwaukee area?
They are. They all live within about 15 minutes of us.
Oh.
We all go to the same church.
Wow. And each one of them they're all married?
Yes, they're all married.
And they all have children?
Yep. My son Tim has 3 daughters. My daughter Lisa has a son and 2 daughters. And my daughter Kristen has a son and a daughter.
So you fill up the church when you go to church. I mean, you had all these.
We take up almost a pew and a half when we go to church.
That's great. It's wonderful. What do you do for recreation? What do you do for fun?
I fish a lot. We have a vacation home up in northern Wisconsin that we've had for about 5 years now, and I've really enjoyed.
My kids call it up north.
Up north.
You're up north.
Yep.
N-O-R-D.
North of Wausau is up north. And I do an awful lot of fishing, bass fishing, northern pike fishing, ice fishing, summer fishing. I do it all. I do turkey hunting, geese, duck hunting, pheasant. No deer hunting, though. I don't want to have to clean anything that big. And I didn't do a lot of hunting until probably about 20 years ago. I think that whole stigma of being in the Army and being in Vietnam really hung over me for quite a while, that I didn't want to do any kind of shooting or anything like that. But I have a good friend that is a real hunter. And we went to a dinner one night, and I won 2 shotguns as door prizes. And he says, "Now you've got to come hunting with me." And I did.
Yeah, good. Where's the place up north? You said it was...
It's south of Minocqua, Wisconsin. It's about 5 miles south of Minocqua.
Okay.
4 hours from Milwaukee.
Nice. That makes it a nice trip. I think we're just about ready to wrap it up. I guess the one last broad question I have, is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything that I haven't asked about or you think is... Remember that your grandchildren and probably great-grandchildren will be watching this to see what you were like.
I think the
what
thing
would
that
you like to say to them?
really sticks in my mind is that there's really a lot of gratitude from me for the military. I went in as kind of a, an 18, 19-year-old, didn't have a lot of direction in life. I knew what I wanted, but I didn't really know how to get there. And I was young, and the military kind of put me on a straight line, and it's still that way today. And being a user of the GI Bill, I mean, that was really a big thing in my life. I never would have gotten through school without that. And I think that's a lot of things that a lot of people don't reuse or remember or able to thank anybody for something like that. And I'm always very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's a good way to end it. I mean, it was, especially the turmoil in the time you were in the service. I mean, it was not all that popular. And
not a day goes by that I don't appreciate everything I have, compared to what I've been through and what I've done and how I've lived for a 2-year period. I mean, it gives you a big appreciation of how you live life today. Yeah, well, it sounded like you came from a humble environment, but supportive from your family, your parents, and living above your grandparents, and then moving to the type of life you have now. Yeah, it's a good life. I'm happy.
So, and this is your first visit to the desert, or have you been here before?
We've been to Arizona a number of times, but this is the first time we've been to California. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law recently moved out here, and that gave us a little incentive to come out during the cold times back in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's right. I had no trouble getting my kids to come out this time of year.
It's beautiful. I love it out here.
Yeah. Good.
My father enlisted in World War II. I don't know the exact dates, but he spent time in Wisconsin in training at Camp McCoy, which is out in northwestern Wisconsin. And he went over to the combat theater about 2 months after D-Day. He went across the English Channel, and he ended up in Holland. And his job in Holland was to run a bakery. And he was a staff sergeant, and he ran a bakery that had about 300 bakers in it.
What was his MOS though? Do you know what his you don't know?
Initially, he started out driving a fuel truck, and he drove up the Alcan Highway, up to Alaska. And then after that, I guess they figured, well, if you can do that, you can run a bakery. So, and they would bake, they would work all night long, and they would bake the breads for all the military people over there, and probably donuts and cookies and everything else they had to go out to supply the guys. And he lived with a family in Holland. Wow. And he did that for his whole time over there, and he had a motorcycle, and he drove back from the person's house to the base every day, and got there in the middle of the night so they could start baking bread.
Between your military experience and your father, I mean, you both have very unique military experience. It's not the routine thing of always an infantryman and I slogged through all this, or I was an artilleryman. You both had very
and I had
unique experiences.
A great-grandfather that was in the German army between World War I and World War II, and there's a picture of him in our family. He was 6'8", very tall gentleman. And there was a picture of him with these leather boots that went up over his knees, with these riding pants, with one of these helmets with a spike on top. And this guy was formidable. He looked like a tough guy.
I'll bet he did. But he didn't serve in World War I or World War II?
No, it was in between that time.
Wow.
And most of my uncles and a couple of my aunts served in the service during World War II. So we've got a good military history in the family.
Well,
but none of the people my age served in the Army or the Air Force or the Marines, or I was the only one in my family out of a lot of grandchildren and cousins that was in the military.
Yeah. Well, part of it's Milwaukee and the German heritage, and or Wisconsin and the German heritage. Well, I'm glad we went back to that. I'll tell David.